Hello guys, you already know what is happening here. We have a time lapse of our still life drawing. In class, you will hear about how to set up your still life, what kind of objects you need to find, and what some of the parameters are for choosing different pieces. But once you have everything picked out, you are going to want to start your drawing. So first things first, we want to think about whether our paper is going to be in portrait, which is tall, or landscape, which is wide. Depending on the objects that you choose, it will make more sense to have it one way or the other. For example, I have a fairly tall shampoo bottle, so I chose to have my paper in portrait. However, if you are doing something with more rectangular forms or spheres, it might be more beneficial for you to do landscape. Also, it's important that you have some sort of lighter surface underneath of your objects so that you can see your shadows. And by the way, those are called cast shadows. We have talked about those before. But the shadow that is formed on the table or surface underneath of your objects is really important to add so that your shapes look like they're occupying space and not just sort of floating in it. So as I'm working here, I'm referencing my picture that I took of my still life, and I'm making sure that all of my lines match up. When drawing 3D objects, if any of your parallel, which are straight up and down and would never intersect, or diagonal lines, if they aren't matching, then your project is going to look really wonky and it's not going to make any sense. So I would not necessarily say use a ruler, but just keep an eye on it and make sure that all of your lines stay the same width apart as you're drawing. Next, you'll notice that I drew the start of the smaller bottle, and then before I even finished it, I moved on to the smaller rectangular box. And the reason for that is I'm trying to decide where objects go in relation to each other. So I drew that long line of the right side of the smaller shampoo bottle, and then if I look at my drawing, I can see kind of how far up you go up the bottle for the bottom of the rectangular box to start. And then I can also see where it hits on the top part of that. And that kind of gives me my scale, right? So I'm going to use my drawing as guidelines to see where everything goes in relation to itself. Similar to that, to draw the right shoulder of the taller bottle, I looked at how far over it went before it hit the cap of the smaller shampoo bottle, right? So in that way, I can kind of see where things go and how far down they need to be. So that's what we call proportion, right? Which is one of our principles of design. How big things are in relation to each other. Another thing to note is that I am using light, sketchy lines as I go. I'm not just going to commit to one single line. I'm going to slowly build them up, and I'm also using a very light touch as I draw, so I can easily erase and adjust as necessary. And this is something that we started all the way back in our personality posters, where you don't just want to do one single line, you want to slowly build them up and make sure that you have everything kind of set up before you commit. When drawing rectangles especially, you also want to be sure that your angles are correct. So there I had drawn the top of that leftmost rectangle a little bit too steep, so I referenced back to my drawing and then adjusted it and made it a little bit more shallow. And that's something that just kind of takes a little bit of practice to do, to look and see kind of where things go. So that's why we're going to just do our sketchy lines, so that we can make sure that everything really goes where it needs to, so that your drawing doesn't end up looking wonky. So once I have all of my objects down on the page, I'm going to look and kind of see where things are at and if everything actually matches up correctly. And I'm also going to sort of clean up some of those extra lines that I don't need anymore. I ended up drawing my drawing a little bit too high up and was considering just shortening the cap of the shampoo bottle, but I decided that looked kind of weird, so instead I just changed it to go off the page slightly. So right now, I'm just referencing between my drawing, my picture, the lines that I have down, and making sure that everything is parallel and lines up appropriately to make it look mostly realistic. I also decided to add some of the little elements of the objects that I was drawing. So the blue box is actually a contact box and it has like a flap that closes on the top. So I drew the flap. I also decided to draw the label. Now I'm not going to do any of the text or design that's on there, but I do want to know that the label is there. Once I drew that bottom section of the bottle cap, I realized that my lines were pretty off between the cap and the body of the bottle, so I ended up adjusting that. And that's just something that you'll have to do as you work through your drawing. You'll put down some extra lines as you kind of are starting to make more details, and you'll realize that something that you initially had put down doesn't really work. And that's when you just go back and adjust in order to make it match up, whether it's a parallel line or a diagonal parallel line. So even with the cylinder, sure, it's a curved line, but all of my lines should be the same going all the way up. And then I just redrew the cap and adjusted it a little bit because it was looking slightly fat compared to the reference image that I have. So that'll do it for the drawing portion of these still lifes. You should be working on this and getting it ready to go. One last thing to mention is that you do want to be filling the page, so don't draw it too small right in the middle. It should be filling your composition, preferably without it going over the top of the page like I did, but you know, what can you do? So get to this. If you have any questions, obviously you can message me. I hope that this helps. Reference back to your PowerPoint if you want like some written directions on this. And we will talk more about shading next week. Good luck.